The best way to improve your writing is reading. And I'm going to move my notes over here. Again, yeah, the best way any copywriter or writer can improve their writing is reading. And what that, there's this idea out there with copywriters that you should be creating more, consuming less. But if you're a writer, you need to be reading a lot, because reading is the easiest way and the best way to improve your writing. Because good writers are good readers and great writers are great readers. And your role as a copywriter, and even as a marketer or business owner, on one end, you're taking language to present something. You need to make that language clear, compelling, and fresh. Not a lot of copywriters, or a lot of copywriters struggle with fresh language, because we read copywriting books, we read sales books, and a lot of the language adheres to something very formulaic. It's not that it is entirely all wrong. It's a decent baseline, but it gets very formulaic very quickly. And that runs you into issues. That puts an artificial ceiling on you if you're just using the generic language and using the generic sales language. How it puts a ceiling on you is if you're not able to take something super difficult, right? Because as a role as a copywriter, you sometimes need to take something that's very complex. It could be very complex software, and you need to take it and you need to present it in a very simple, clear, and compelling manner. And that's difficult to do. And the only way you can do that is by your command of language, your command of words. The second way you're doing that is you have to be able to see the framework. And that kind of comes from reading of this critical thinking. What is it that you're taking here that's very complex, and how can you translate it into something that's very simple? Because, whether it's a business owner or it's a general market of, just regular customers, they're not going to be wanting to read something super literary. They're not going to be wanting to read something, that's super difficult to read. And on the flip side of this, they are tired of formulaic sales copy, or they're tired of corporate speak. So you need to find ways to take something that's complex and then put it in an original way. On the flip side of this, you need to take something that's relatively boring, like if you're selling white socks, you need to be able to present that in a clear manner. That's exciting without doing too much hyperbole or formulaic stuff. Like a lot of copywriters tend to make this mistake that they're writing to customers that are under extreme emotional duress all the time. Like if you're just selling white socks, your customers are just probably wanting white socks, right? But you still need to know how to present that. Like Duke Cannon with soap is a great example of this. They just take regular soap and they present it into a masculine market, and they do it in a pretty good job. So that takes a little bit more than just pressing on desires or pressing on fears, or all the other tropes like the copywriters here. Not that those things are necessarily wrong, but I'm hoping here to take you deeper than that. And you can do that with better reading, because better reading will help you see conceptual, it'll help you make market observations, it'll help you think about your customer, and it'll help you take a command of language and present it to your customer, rather than take words and language and write better sales copy to your particular market. Or you're able to think about that particular market, then you're able to translate it how it needs to be translated. So with that said, idea as copywriters that, and really as anyone, that reading offers us benefits and wisdom. We have learned and heard that reading offers us wisdom, insights, it can optimize our business. We have these lists out here of read these 9 books to become an entrepreneur, or read these 10 books to become a copywriter, or I've read thousands of books, all were a waste of time except for these particular 3, just read these, right? So we have this idea. And even when we're in school, we have this idea of we need to read the book to pass the quiz or the test. And some of us even have the idea of, if we're on a boring trip in the back of the car, we can read the book to pass time, right? So we have this idea that reading offers us some sort of benefit. And most of you are here because you're interested in professional self-development. And probably a lot of you are also interested in personal self-development. And I call that world capital S success. And in that world of success, of how to better yourself, See, I'm just moving this here. How to better yourself, how to think better, how to be a better professional, how to get better marketing, how to increase your business. There's a lot of ideologies and lessons of how to read. And we have this idea that reading is this particular holy grail. Again, we have those lists of the 9 books to become X, that this list correlates a particular outcome. Then we have this idea that reading these particular books offers us a particular outcome, right? So we got to extract the lessons. But this idea that reading is this particular holy grail, that reading is this thing that can offer us a secret key, it weakens our agency. And as for copywriters and business owners, it limits our scope of thinking, it limits our observational skills. And for you copywriters, again, it limits the way you write because you're looking for the wrong thing. And what we're looking for is what I call lesson hunting. So that's what I'm going to start with right here, or we're going to talk about lessons. So again, we know books offer us ideas. We know that they offer us lessons. But now we have this frantic idea of, I got to extract the lessons. I need to get the income secrets. I need to get the secrets to become a supermarketer, right? So what you're doing is you're looking for this one-way conversation of, I just got to sit back and get all these lessons. And then we tie that to this frantic note-taking system that we're often offered, right? We got to get the lessons. I got to get the bullets of the 5 core income secrets from this particular book. I need to get the 7 applicable lessons, or all books can be put down into 5 bullet points, and I need to get the 5 bullet points to extract the lessons. And then, I'm going to find the speed reading methods, speed reading is completely bunk, by the way, to extract the absolute perfect lessons. That seems, right, like you're doing something. It's well-intentioned, right? Because you're staying active. You're doing all of these particular things, but what it's doing really is, I call that it's passive, because it's an exercise in shallow business, because we're not engaging with the book. We're not standing on our feet and engaging with it ourselves. All we're doing is just looking for pithy platitudes. We're looking for what we heard at a latest marketing event. We're looking for the mindset quote, or we're looking for the habit quote, or we're looking for the marketing lesson. And then on top of that, capital S, or success, has a lot of books that pander to that. A lot of books that are ghostwritten that panders to that. And these ghostwriters are very, very talented, because they know exactly how to create those very pithy platitudes. And it's not that there's anything wrong with these books. If you're just starting out, there's nothing wrong with a book like that. But if you're really reading it and looking at it a whole, you realize they're not really putting forth much of an argument. But what they're doing is they are working towards the person taking it or reading it is going to be able to find those 5 lessons. It's going to be find the 5 applicable lessons. And what we're doing is we're reading to affirm what we already know. So we hear some sort of conference speak, and then we go into a book, no matter what the book is, and then we just, mindset lessons. Oh yeah, no, it's all about hustle, bro. He got up early and he hustled. He didn't care what other people thought of him. It's right here, man. So all the book starts getting forced into that lens. And there are books that are written for that particular lens. But the big problem is with that is we start taking any book outside that's not a success book, and we start forcing it into that particular lens. We start forcing it into that mindset lens, because we're not engaging with the sentences. We're not engaging with the ideas. We're not thinking about it. We're just sitting back there going like, oh yes, oh, I got the idea. Oh my God. Oh, thank you. I got it. Mindset. It's all mindset. And the big issue with that, and again, so what I just said is you're taking regular books and you're just putting it in through that lens. So I got a book a couple of years ago, and I don't really like the book, but it's this book called Bullshit Jobs. It's a rather nihilistic sort of midwit look of work. But the core argument of the book is that basically there are a lot of jobs that we're not passionate about, well, no duh, and they don't offer us any value or anything like that, or they could be replaced by AI. But if you are reading in the current capital S success ideologies, a lot of people will look at it and be like, oh my God, it's about quit the 9 to 5. Don't be a normie. So, I quit the 9 to 5. My job is replaceable, so I better get irreplaceable skills. Oh, I saw the 10 income secrets. That's what he's talking about. That's not what that book is about. but we start forcing books into that lens. And I did that myself. And I remember I read like Winston Churchill's biography by William Manchester, which is pretty famous. And all I got out of it was like, oh, Winston Churchill didn't care. And he had foresight. And it's just like, I completely missed the whole book. So what we're doing on the whole, what I'm ranting about right here is, while again, it seems that we're being active, it seems that we're taking notes, it seems that we're finding lessons, but again, it's theater. It's an exercise in shallow busyness, as I said. What we're doing is we're not engaging with it. And for you writers, you're not engaging with the sentences. You're just looking for the lessons that you somewhere heard elsewhere. You're not moving past anything. Now, if you're, again, a new beginner, something like Atomic Habits or one of those books isn't going to mislead you per se. But if you're not going past it, if you're just trying to force every book through that, you're not engaging with anything. And what that does is, if you're just taking that limited scope of just find the lessons, is you're limiting your thinking, you're limiting your critical thinking. For you copywriters, that means you're going to start putting everything through the lens of, oh, I just got to solve the problem. Well, okay, that's one thing. But if you're just seeing it as this complete black and white, limited, it must be, oh, well, they have bad habits, so I need to sell them better habits because I read the habit book and they don't have mindset, right? You're limiting your range to see things. You're really dulling your vision. So you're glazing over arguments and you're glazing over ideas. And as a copywriter, you need to be able to see conceptual things in the market. You need to be able to see your market, need to be able to see the nuance in your customers. And that isn't going to come from if you're just sitting there trying to get mindset lessons from books. So what I really call that is you're bending the knee, right? You're taking your agency out of it. You're taking yourself completely out of it. And you're just doing what you think you should be doing. So let's stand you guys up here. And don't, hoping you guys don't need to stand. If I would be impressed if actually people stood up. So you don't need to literally stand. But I'm trying to figuratively stand you on your feet, stand you on your own agency, to give you a backbone when you're reading. And the other part of what I'm going to talk about here is it's going to put the fun back in reading. Because a lot of that lesson hunting takes all of the fun out of reading. It takes all of the color out of reading. Because reading has got to be fun. That's a great part about it. It should be fun. It shouldn't be this thing of this life hacker thing to optimize yourself. It's a great way to have fun. And when you're having fun with it, you're going to extract a whole lot more. So I like to look at reading as an intimate conversation. To gain the most out of a book, you need to be having an intimate conversation with the author. You can look at it like you're sitting in a cabin in the remote woods, and you have a particular author sitting with you, and you're going to have an intimate conversation with him. And you want to try to understand the topic as much as he or she understands it. And I like to look at this two ways. And you can look at it, either both of the ways or a combination of the ways. The first way I look at reading as an intimate conversation is you want to work to leave the book on the same intellectual footing as the author. So what that means, you're challenging yourself to understand the topic they are writing about or the arguments they are writing about on the same footing. And in your mind, you kind of want to be able to leave the book and have an easy conversation with that particular author about that you understand what their topic is. And this requires some humility, right? So I got to say that because in case there's the hustle bros on here, that means you're not going to read Aristotle and be like, oh yeah, I'm the exact same intellectual level of Aristotle. So, no, you're challenging yourself to get there. And what you need to be doing is, in a conversation that works like this, is you need to be asking questions. What are you trying to say here? Well, you're saying this, but as opposed to what? Then what? You want to be asking questions. You also want to press back. It's a conversation between you and that author. You don't just want to sit there and agree and, oh my God. You want to be able to press back. And if you disagree, you have to be able to state why you disagree. Not just, oh, you're stupid. You have to be able to list it out, and you have to be able to say why you agree. The second way that I look at it is you want to look at it as a conversation between you and a close friend. So you and if you're real close friends, you have no problem pushing back on them, right? You don't have a conversation with your close friend unless it's at the gym where you're just shouting maxims at each other, like, yeah, you got this. It's all mindset. That might be great if you're about to go out and try lifting or something like that. But if you want to think of this as you and a close friend are having a intimate conversation, and with your close friends, if he says a why you agree, you're not just going to be like, well, it's just mindset, bro. You're going to hopefully be a good friend and be able to state why you agree or disagree. And that's how you want to engage with, or that mentality of being in a close conversation with your friend, with a close friend, is an easy way to kind of get out of this lesson hunting thing and start putting yourself in the conversation. You want to see yourself in the room with the author. And over time, now this takes time, right? Because we're so used to seeking lessons. We're not used to like, I'm just going to sit in a room with like Thomas Sowell or David Ogilvy and try to have a close conversation with him. But in time, if you do that, if you have this mentality of I'm having a close conversation, or I'm going to try to leave on the same ground as David Ogilvy or Thomas Sowell, it's going to start elevating your thinking, because to get there, you're going to have to start asking questions, and you're going to develop better critical thinking when you do this. This isn't an overnight thing. I'm going to do this in 5 minutes. I got it. It's going to take time and some work to do it. I'm going to, or before I get into that. So the other part is, if you're engaging like this, especially for your writers, you're going to want to be looking at, or it's going to naturally draw you to look at what he's saying. So that's going to start making you look at the words, right? That's going to start making you look at the vocabulary, look how he's crafting the sentences. And that's where you can start being able to steal the tricks of the writer. And that's really important for a copywriter. Because I know there's some copywriters out there who are like, well, I don't want to read Dickens because then I'll write real wordy stuff. And there is some truth to that, but as you get better, you need to be able to realize how you can engage with the author, see the tricks that they're doing, but be able to steal those tricks, but be able to do it in a way where you can present it to your market. Because you're noticing the tricks, but you can do it in your own way, right? You can just steal a little bit if you're engaging like this. Like, this is how he's presenting. You'll be able to look at a book like Thomas Sowell or something. Like, this is how he's starting with what people know here. And here is the argument of how he gets them to move off of that. And here's how he summarizes that argument to make his point. So you're like, well, how can I do that for copy? What kind of tricks can I be stealing for that? That's only going to happen if you're engaging with a book and if you're asking questions and if you're curious about how they are presenting that argument versus just sitting there, I'm just going to get this lesson and move on. And this takes time, and I'll get into reading speed a little bit later and how we do that. So first, I'm going to cover how we do this with nonfiction books, and then I'll go into fiction books, where fiction is going to be a great resource for you writers to really improve your writing. I think that's a great place to learn how to read slow. But first, we'll get into nonfiction. So nonfiction books, nonfiction reading. I'm sure a lot of you read nonfiction. A lot of it is the sort of airport fare. But I'll give you a way to kind of how to be deliberate with reading fiction, how to kind of get into that conversation. And probably a lot of those success books will start to go by the wayside in a bit. So my two big influences are a guy named Mortimer Adler. He wrote How to Read a Book. It's a little bit snobby, but it's very good. And then another writer who I really liked was Alan Jacobs. And he wrote this book called Pleasure of Reading in an Age of Distraction. It's a little bit less snobby than Adler, but both are very good. So those are two resources that I looked at. But I'm going to go into my process of how I read a nonfiction book and how you can engage with it. So let's just say you have any nonfiction book. I don't care what it is. It could be The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It could be The Second World War by Victor Davis Hanson. Whatever it is, so you have a nonfiction book. What I like to do is in a notebook, and again, before I get into this, I want you guys to make this your own. That's really key. But I'll give a couple of things you can do to make it your own, or to give you some influence or inspiration. So you don't have to do it. In short, you don't have to do it my exact way. So to get back into it, I take out my notebook, or I have my nonfiction book. I take out my notebook and I ask 3 questions before I start reading it. What kind of book is it? What looks to be its structure? And what's its thesis? And I'll cover these questions right now. So what kind of book is it? I don't just write down like, oh, it's nonfiction, or I don't go to the back. I like to look at it as workbook, practical, social theory, history, biography, or so, and so on. So workbook, and I'll cover these quickly. Workbook is like Atomic Habits is a workbook. It's a set of steps, methods, and exercises to try to get some particular outcome. The same thing is you could take a certain grammar books or like a vocabulary book is a particular workbook. There's some copywriting books where you write down headlines, or it gives an example and write down headlines. This is more of a workbook formula. So if there's a set of practical steps or quizzes or sentences or paragraphs, something like that, considered a workbook. Practical, maybe I'm lazy or maybe I'm selfish. I consider almost all books practical. Mortimer Adler has this laid out, with this real particular, or he enumerates these kind of reasons of what to call a practical book, and it's pretty dense. I just like to think of it, most books as practical because it helps me think and write. Like a book like Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, I consider a practical book. And most people would say, well, it's on economics or it's on social theory, and certainly that is involved in it. But if you read Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, it might change the way you vote. It might change the way how you consider the economics of your particular business. It might change the way you think about your geographic location. So he has this real rich insight into so much that it can really help you see, or I guess you could say, see the matrix, as the kids say these days, on particular things. So a practical book, it's just something that helps you think. Social theory is something really dense. You don't need to worry about it so much right now, but it's something like a treatise on human nature by David Hume, or Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith. It basically tells you how things arrived at how they are. So it's kind of like real dense philosophy. I still put those books in the practical, and then history and biography should be pretty self-evident. So, you're just trying to get a lay of the land of what is this book trying to tell me. So I would try to look just maybe is it workbook or practical, and just kind of go for that. Looks to be its structure is, and I'll go through the process of how I answer these questions, but I'm just trying to figure out, okay, how is this author laying out the argument? Is it a chronological history? Is it a set of tips of you want to start here and end here? How is it just laid out? What's its thesis is I want you, before you start reading in full, to, you look through to find these questions, answer the questions. Then after that, you want to write the thesis as if you are about to write the book. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just you write the thesis as if you are about to write the book. You just take a guess. And I write down one quick sentence. And how I answer that is I look at the title. A lot of people they kind of just skip over the title. For instance, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Most people see it as how to not give a fuck. There's a subtle art of not giving a fuck. So there's something in there where he's trying to put in some sort of either nuance, or there's some sort of way to kind of not give a fuck, or how there's some sort of emotional steps to it, or his argument. So that's what kind of the title tells you. Or The Second World Wars by Victor Davis Hanson. He's saying, most people think of the Second World War, but he's saying wars, right? So he's implying something in the argument that he's going to cover multiple, either wars. There's something implied in that title. Or a great book that I read about 2 years ago called The Sack of Detroit. So, there's some sort of thing of Detroit falling, right? We think of, the sack of a city, or the sack of a quarterback. So there's something there that took down something great. There's something implied there, right? So after I look at the title, I go to the table of contents. I read the table of contents. Some of the older books do this great job of putting the thesis or the subheadings in the table of contents. It really gives you a good layout. Then I go to the introduction, and I read the introduction, and then I read the ending. Now, some introductions are like 50 pages, and some endings are like 100 pages. If that's the case, you don't need to read the whole thing. I just look for either the quick introductory paragraphs, or the final paragraphs of the first chapter, and just see if there's something about, here's the argument I'm going to lay out in the book. You get that often in nonfiction books. And in the conclusion, I'm looking for the summary, or some authors have kind of put forth their vision for the future, or what they hope to attain in the book. I'm just trying to get an idea of what the layout is. Then I go into the index, and I look for probably certain substantial headings, right? So let's say if Nabil wrote a copywriting book, and then there's, how-to headlines, and he has underneath, there's a whole bunch of subchapters or a whole bunch of items. And let's say, under how-to headlines, there is the curiosity approach, and there's 10 pages dedicated to that. I'll just flip to that page. I'll look for a curiosity approach, and I'll just look for a sentence or two. And then and then set either sometimes before the index or after the index, I will read the book flap and just try to get a summary of the book. And then I go ahead and answer those questions. This process takes me anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes. It depends on the mood. You can take however much time you want or however little time you want on that. All I'm asking you to do is to get a little bit of a layout of what it is you're about to read. So if you have ever been skiing, at the very top of the mountain, there's they usually do a trail map of the entire mountain. I'm just asking you to go and take a look at the trail map before you start skiing a little bit. And you don't need to sit there for hours. You're taking a look. You're just taking a guess. So now what I do is so I answer those questions. And then I write down the questions that I'm going to be considering while I'm reading the book. And that is, the first question I ask is, what's it about on a whole? Is it what's being said in detail and how? Is it true in part or in whole? What of it and what can I walk away with? So I'll answer how I go through that. So what's it about in a whole? This isn't the lessons, right? This isn't I got the 5 mindset lessons. What you're trying to do is, what's it about in a whole is you're trying to just quickly lay out, or you can answer however you want to do it. Or you can answer these in sentence form. I answer them in 1 or 2 sentences each, or you can answer them in a blog post. You can answer them in your head on a walk. I'm just asking you to come in some way, shape, or form and answer them however you want to answer them. So what's it about on a whole is, what are the ideas that are being expressed in the book? What argument is the author trying to get out? Okay. What main thesis or bigger thesis is the author trying to put out there? What's being said in detail, and how is this author unpacking his argument? How is he showing it to me? How is he making these points? Or how is he showing me to do some particular set of habits? Now, the toughest question that you're going to ask if you've never read in this way before is it true in part or in whole? That is, do you disagree or agree? Do you find it true or not true? And you have to be radically honest with yourself. If you agree, you can't just be like, well, because it's badass. Okay, that's great, it's badass, but why do you think it's badass, right? Or, I disagree. Okay, well, why do you disagree? Because Marx is an idiot. Well, why is he an idiot? And you want to get as empirical or as close to the granular truth as you can. And even if you just say, like, look, I don't have a good argument, it doesn't sit with me. You have to be honest and say that. That's going to be the toughest question at first, because you're trying to understand why it is you agree, or why it is you think these tips are good, or why it is you think this argument is good or bad. It's going to be very difficult at first, but the only way you're going to get there is by starting to engage with it. And that's going to start engaging your other ideas of what you've read or what you know or what you think you know. You have to be very honest with yourself with this question. That's going to be the toughest question if you've never read in this way. Then I asked what of it, and that is, I kind of answered it a few different ways, but the way I look at it is, where does this sit kind of in the grand scheme of ideas? Is this pretty exciting, or is this, well argued? I just kind of like what these ideas or what I just read, where does it sit in the grand scheme of things? Now, the last question of what can I walk away with, that's where you write down the lessons that you got. You can write down, if you want to write down, it's all mindset, write it down. I don't care what it is. Write down whatever it is that you gained from that particular book. Like I read, I think, the Coolidge biography by Amity Shlaes, which is a fantastic biography. And I think my lesson was something like, I can own my introversion. But I knew what it is. I mean, and everyone else would be like, oh, own your introversion, right? But what kind of walk away with are the lessons that you can take away from it, whatever it is. Way of thinking, whatever it is, that's for you. And again, as I said, answer them however you want to answer these questions. You can go over it in your head, you can write it down in the book, you can make it in the blog post. I just ask you to consider those questions a little bit. Let's see, which one do I hear first? So if most of you have read in the success manner or the capital S success manner I mentioned before about the seeking lessons, before you get into note taking, or I'm going to cover some notes here, I advise you to try a couple of books without taking any notes. Ask those questions I just said. Is it true in part? What can I walk away with? What's it about? Ask those questions and then read it and look for those questions, but don't take any notes. And I remember when I first did that, when I first got off the find the lesson train, as I thought I was doing something wrong. I read a few books and I felt like the guru gods were going to come get me. I was like, oh no, I'm not getting anything out of the book. I need to be getting the tips, and I need to be doing a Richard Feynman thing, and I need to be uploading them into the cloud. But it was so freeing to get away from this lesson, hunting lesson mindset, that I started engaging with the book. So if you've never read in this way, just take a couple of books and a couple nonfiction books and read them without taking any notes whatsoever. You can answer the questions at the end, but just try a few books without taking notes, because it can be cathartic, and it is kind of weird when you're thinking like, oh, I'm not getting anything. And then you realize you're reading the book. I'm like, well, now I have to engage with the book because I can't just sit there and write platitudes. So taking notes, I marginalia. I mean, if you guys want to do notebooks, bullet journals, whatever it is you want to do, all of my notes are pretty much in my marginalia, and then I answer those questions in a journal. But the biggest thing I would do is, instead of seeking lessons, is ask questions. You want to be engaging the book at a question standpoint, right? Great questions to ask are, as opposed to what? Then what, right? Like if an author says something, well, you need to grow revenue, you get to say, well, as opposed to what? Not growing revenue? You want to be able to press back like that. What are you saying? Or are you trying to say X? But what if X, Y, Z? What if that happens? Play devil's advocate as you're reading, and in your notes, just have those questions going. And you can do it right in the book. You can take the margin and have those questions going. You want to be really going question forward at first. Then but make observations. Again, it's an intimate conversation, right? You're going to look at like, oh, well, this is just like that time, right? If I'm reading Nabil's book, I want to think of it as I'm having a conversation with Nabil, and I might get involved in that conversation, and I just make those notes like, oh, this is just like that. In time, if you're asking questions and you're making observations, you're going to start moving through the book critically, right? You're going to start spotting inconsistencies. And for you writers, you're going to start noticing, how is he presenting this argument? Or this argument isn't very good. Where is he making mistakes? Is it in the writing? Is he missing something? Or why am I not following this? Or is it me? So that's going to start engaging you, looking at the words, looking at the arguments, looking at the ideas. How are they presenting the ideas? So I think that covers. All right, so now on to fiction. I think I covered all my non-fiction there. Sip of coffee here. And again, before I go on to fiction, again, I'll say it again and repeat myself. If you've never read books in that way, if you're used to writing the mindset lessons or used to finding the lessons, try a few books without it. It will just try. And if you're worried about the book, that you're not going to extract something, you can sandbag it, pick something real easy. And I don't care, what it is, golf mentality or something you don't care about, but just try a few books without it before you start getting back into the note taking, because it'll help you release you from those rails of just, I got to sit back and find the lessons. All right. So fiction. There's this idea in copywriting that you read the nonfiction books and then you take fiction to understand people. And that is a good idea. But there's also this idea that you don't really engage with it anything past trying to find a story structure or trying to find like the sales psychology. Like, oh, this is the 7. There's a fear I can press. Okay. So fiction is a whole lot of fun to read, and it does offer an enormous amount of insight into human nature. I think there's a couple of studies out there. I don't know how good these studies are, but that fiction helps increase your empathy. But fiction will help you see how certain authors are being able to frame how someone reacts in a moment. And that gives you writers a lot of information of how you can steal those tricks. Or, okay, I've noticed this before. Here's how I can kind of write it. And fiction, to me, is one of the best places to develop your, what I call reading touch. And I'll get into that after I cover fiction here. So my main thing for you with fiction is to just enjoy it. Too many copywriters have this idea of, I'm going to hunt the story structure so I can use the story structure in my video sales letter. It is very difficult to do this, right? Hollywood right now is struggling, and those are some of the best story writers out there. They're professional story writers, right? And then there's this idea that you're going to see a fiction book and turn into the show, The Office. You're going to turn into the writing staff overnight. No, it takes a lot of work to do that. And the problem is, if you're just hunting hero's journey, you're just hunting structure, or there's another popular idea, I'm not sure if it's still as popular now, is you're hunting for the emotional third rail. You kind of see this, you got to give emotional backstory, you got to give emotional backstory. Not all stories play through that hero's journey structure. Like Lee Child's Jack Reacher series, there is no hero's journey because Jack Reacher is a super smart Goliath. He's a super Giga Chad who's super smart, super ripped, and he knows he just kicks ass. So he's coming. There's no hero's journey. He never struggles. That's the whole thing. He's a guy that you want on your side because he doesn't struggle. So he's just a metaphor for force. But if you're sitting there trying to find the hero's journey for your copywriting thing, so I'm going to write a Lee Child thing, like you're going to be lost. So you're going to miss the enjoyment of the fiction. You're not going to understand what's going on. You're not going to be able to take what you dare and what you can steal for your own writing. So what I do is a great book that I read about fiction is Francine Pro's How to Read Like a Writer. And the best thing I like about her is even though she injects her opinion of what she's looking for, it really puts how to read fiction on your terms and see what you want to see and take what you want to see. Versus, some weird literary professor of, the color green means Green New Deal or capitalism or greed or it's so hair splitting. So I got from her, I kind of came up with 4 questions that I like to ask. And this is going to be important for you writers here is what do the sentences reveal? What does the word choice reveal? How do the details structure the story? What personalities are revealed in the dialogue? To me, what do the sentences reveal? I'm sort of looking at it as, is it like Jack Carr? He's detailing movement, he's detailing, emotional struggle right now, or is he just looking at the sentences like, oh, it's cool. This is how he details movement, or this is how he unpacks something that's really complex. So that's kind of neat. He does, he does noun verb, and then he does something else. That's pretty cool. So you want to see what are the sentences revealing to you. Word choice is how, one in the word choice could be like what kind of words are painting the atmosphere, what kind of words are painting the story. And the other part, going back to Jack Carr here for you copywriters, could be what words is he using to detail something like the mechanisms of an M16 machine gun? What kind of words is he picking here? And I'm not looking at it like, oh, he's using the word dark a lot. That must be foreboding, foreshadowing. Like, I don't look at it like that, right? I'm just looking at what I like to see. So, and that's what I like. Details. This is also a good one for your copywriters. This is basically, there's one, often really good fiction writers will put a detail that suddenly makes the entire scene come to life. So Raymond Chandler, who's one of my favorite writers, he wrote the Philip Marlowe series. He is maybe one of the greatest detail writers ever. And basically what it is Marlowe walks into a room and then he sees he's looking at a chair, and then Chandler defines a chair like a looking button on the chair, right? Or there's a scratch on a pen. And for whatever reason, that little tiny scratch on a pen or something, that small detail suddenly makes the entire room come to life. And for you copywriters, this is really important for you to notice. Not that you're going to be doing this in your copy. You're not going to be putting like, well, there's a scratch on the pen, right? But this sort of helps you understand how to kind of paint atmosphere or how to paint detail in, if you're presenting something that's complex, how you can make it stand out. And also it makes you looking for particular words because you guys are wordsmiths and you need more words at your command. Because if you have less words, you're only going to be a boxer who's only throwing really weak jabs. The more words you have, the more from your tool set. So going on to the last question is what personalities are revealed in the dialogue? That's where I'm looking for, can I understand the character of the dialogue? Are they a insecure person? Are they a hustler? Are they a fast talker? Are they shallow? Are they really smart? Are they anxious? That's what I'm just kind of looking for. And again, and I'll leave this, copywriters, don't just sit there and look for story structures. The more you read fiction, the more stories you read, then you'll start to notice these beats. And then you'll also notice that not every story fits into a hero's journey, right? Again, if you read Raymond Chandler and were looking for the hero's journey, you're not going to find it. he does very different elements. You know, if you're reading, again, you know, like Lee Child, it's not there. So I'm just imploring you to stop looking for hero's journey in every single thing. So how to make reading fiction work for you and work for you writers. This was, when I learned this was life-changing for me, and it was because it added so much enjoyment into my life, and it also helped my writing so much. I wish I had discovered it when I was a copywriter, because I think it would have really helped a lot more. But so that is reading slowly, or what I like to call reading, developing reading touch. So again, as I said earlier, speed reading is lame, right? You know, this idea of you're going to read a book a day, you know, it's just really lame. It's been bunk, it's shallow, it doesn't do anything. And I think there was a Robert, I think on the Huberman podcast recently, he said something, you know, reading slowly at a normal pace helps you sub-vocalize and helps you retain more and comprehend more. So if you're a slow reader, embrace it. If you read fast, embrace it. Probably maybe even slow down a little bit. All I'm asking you to just be a little bit deliberate. And being deliberate here with fiction is I like to read fiction at a pace where I can look at the words and I can name the parts of speech. This is, you can look at it like a noun, adjective, verb, and I'm just taking my time. And I'm not trying to do it in distracting things. I'm not saying like, noun, verb, noun, adjective, okay. Like, I'm not sitting there trying to call it out like that. But I'm just going slow enough that if I pause for a second, or if I just check in every once in a while, I can look at it and I can name the parts of speech. And that's the pace I take through fiction. And then for your writers, if I really like something, I can slow it down a little bit more. And I'm trying to still, what kind of grammar tricks are they doing here? How is she creating such a compelling scene here? Or how is Jack Carr making this so exciting? Like he's detailing something that'd be really boring, but this is pretty exciting. How is he doing that? And the other thing I do is, and this will be really important to you writers, is I will read sentences aloud. Any sentence I love, how long it is or how short it is, if it's a whole paragraph, I read it aloud. Reading sentences aloud is a great way when you're editing copy, you're editing your writing. If you're reading sentences aloud here or there, the sentences you like, you're going to be able to start to get a real great knack for pacing and for tone. For instance, we all hear like, oh, you want to write copy in a warm tone. Okay, we understand that, but what does that exactly mean, to read copy in a warm tone, or to write copy, excuse me, in a warm tone? I remember when I was at Yoga Burn, you know, I wrote, it was a couple of years, I wrote as a woman to a primarily female audience. So I had to change and alter the words I was using, because, you know, men tend to write a little bit sharper. You know, masculine men tend to write a little bit sharper on their tone, and that appeals to them. That doesn't appeal sometimes to a women market. So I had to soften the language a little bit and the word choice. And the way to kind of get that is, if you're reading sentences aloud, you'll have an idea of how to pick that up. You'll have an idea of like, here's the kind of tone, here's warm tone, here's a harsher edge. And reading aloud is a great way to start picking that up. So then when you're editing your copy and you're reading it aloud, you're able to pick up pace or tone and cadence and all of these kind of neat tricks that are really important. Because with copy, there has to be a particular set of rhythm. If you're just writing the third grade level Hemingway, you know, the product was good. It came out of the box. I took the product. I suddenly gained muscle. I could not believe it. Like, you don't want to write at a real third grade level, right? But if you're just writing those short sentences like that, like, tone's awful. If you gave that to a voiceover guy, I'd be like, well, what is this, right? So reading sentences aloud is a great way to steal those tricks of the writers you like. So again, this comes into what I call reading touch. And this is going to be pretty important for you writers, especially copywriters, when you need to research a market. So again, read fiction slowly. You know, if you can go at the pace of where I can recognize the parts of speech, that's great. And, you know, you'll find that it doesn't have to be super or anything like that. Reading touch is your reading speed. The more, and I find that when you start being deliberate with your fiction reading, this helps you read faster elsewhere. So what I mean by reading touch is, it's kind of like you're going on a drive to a pretty area, right? Like from where I live in Denver, Colorado, if you want to drive to the Southwest Colorado, it's one of the prettiest drives in the world. I think it's usually ranked in the top 10, and it is gorgeous. Right? There's mountains, there's green pastures, There's beautiful pull-offs to look at the mountain ranges. So when you're driving at that, you're going to be going at different speeds, right? You're not just going to be going 115 miles an hour and skip it all and get there. You're probably like, oh, whoa, that's pretty cool. I'm going to slow down and check out this beautiful pasture. That's how you want to be looking at it, right? So there are times, yeah, when you're just on a highway, it's a boring highway, and you're going to step on the gas and you're going to go through. There are times when you're reading, and this really happens a lot with the capital S success books, where it's like, all right, well, this section here, he's just kind of saying what he said before. So, you're just you read the chapter headings, a couple of paragraphs, you can fly through those parts. Then there are some parts that you get to where maybe you want to pull over and look at things a little bit. You want to inspect things a little bit. And there are certain works of nonfiction that are really beautiful, where instead of driving through it, it's like you want to look at it like a walk in the garden or a walk in the forest. And you can take however much time you want to take there. And that comes from how much you're engaging with the words. Like, I can skip this, I don't need this as much, or here's a part I really want to spend time with. And this is great if you're looking at sales letter, dissecting sales letters. If you're able to spend time with things and you're doing what I mentioned above of being able to think critically through it and looking at the words, you're able to dissect exactly what that copywriter is doing. You're able to dissect what Ogilvy is doing. Like, oh, there's a couple of cool tricks he's using here. And also, for research ends, reading touches, some of you need to be buying, a ton of books on a topic, right? So let's say you get a freelancer, you've never played golf before in your life, and you get a great offer, or you get a great gig with a golf company. Well, I don't know how you do it. Usually a lot of people have the impulse, well, I better start reading up on golf. So you might buy tons of books about golf, but you don't have time to read all of those books. But if you're able to grab those books and you're able to know, okay, here are some important sections. I can spend a little bit of time reading these. These books don't really matter. These guys are all saying the same three things. You're able to look through these books really quickly. That's where you can start finding it is what you need to be finding. And that comes from what I mentioned above, right? Like if you're looking at the title, if you're looking at the index, if you know how to find the thesis, you're able to take a pile of like 15 books, look through them, and then you're able to say, oh, this market is getting a lot of this information. Maybe this market is disjointed. For example, a personal example is when I started writing for Yoga Burn, or before we even came up with a topic really, or when we got into it and what we're going to email, and when it kind of became, we were germinating the idea, I ordered a whole bunch of yoga books. And I realized it was all like chakra nonsense. And I realized like, okay, the market we're going after, this is why they're scared of this. I'm looking through these books, none of it is really making sense. And chakras, and it's new age, it's blah, 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 blah. And it sounds like a white girl on Instagram talking about her chakras and her trauma, and it doesn't make any sense. So I was like, there's a disconnect here, right? So that came from being able to somewhat survey the landscape. And everything I mentioned here it helps you do that. And reading touch, yeah, you'll be able to go in, like, here's the 3 important things out of 50 books on this particular topic. So if you're researching everything I just mentioned, or copywriters, this will really help a lot, especially what kind of book is it, and what am I looking at, and what's the thesis. And also I'll give here's a key secret, bonus secret, $9,000 value. My secret to knowing a niche, I have this in my notes, is if you can find books that reveal the history of that niche, that's a great way to see trends. It's a great way to see what's going on. Wealth does have a lot of books on it, but like weight loss and fitness, you'll find books on, like, there's a book I have here, the history of the 3 square meals a day, where that came from. You may not be using this information in your sales letters. You may not be using this information in, on what you're writing per se, because it might not, but it gives you an idea of how to see your market. It gives you an idea to kind of see what trends are going on. It gives you just an understanding of what's going on. And I find that it helps you with your gut intuitions, right? You're able to see things a little bit quicker. So you're able to move a little bit quicker, which seems weird because you're studying history, but you kind of say, well, this has been here before. Well, interesting. Well, this angle worked a long time ago. I mean, a good example of that is like the ketogenic diet. That was a diet that was around, I think, in like the 1920s or before, something like that. It fell out of favor. And then they said, well, why don't we try this again? It worked great then. And that's, who knows who came back up with the ketogenic diet, but it was a trend, right? So you can kind of look at those things like interesting. We might be able to try this hook again. You know, it's been buried for 50 years. Let's give it a shot. So that's my key secret. Inject it in. You know, $9,000 value free today. There's also to my bad segue into book lists and what books to read. Most of you, especially since a lot of you are in capital S success or in some way of capital S success, we have this idea of read these 9 books to become an entrepreneur. You know, or Dickie Bush. I read thousands of books on copywriting. All are a waste except these 3. Or read these, you know, or some 25-year-old puts out there, read these 5 books before you turn 50. Like, well, thanks. You know, there's this idea in capital S success that a list of books correlates an outcome. And I go, you know, a lot of these books, and I'm sure me having said, you know, the 9 books you need to read before you become an entrepreneur, I'm sure there are plenty of you who immediately knew the books, right? Psychology of Money, 4 Agreements, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, Atomic Habits, the four Agreements, and then a token classic, either Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning or Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, Almanac. You know all of these books already are coming. They're all coming. You know they're all coming. Whether it's a list of 9 or a list of 12, you know it's coming. And it's not that those books are bad per se, okay? And I'll clarify here, you know, something like if you are brand new to internet marketing, if you're brand new to copywriting, or if you're brand new from working from home, something like Atomic Habits, Deep Work, Cash Advertising, you know, and the Boron Letters, they're not going to steer you in the wrong direction. But there's this idea of if I just keep reading these books, I'll become X, right? These are books that are a great starting point. But you got to move on from them, right? If you're still reading the 9 books every entrepreneur should read before they die, and if you're still reading those after years, you need some soul searching, because you got to expand outside of these books. For instance, if you look at if any of you are on Twitter, every once in a while you'll see a billionaire or a famous CEO drop a list of books that they've been reading or that they like, and you'll notice that none of them have Almanac, Psychology of Money, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, Atomic Habits. They'll not have any of that. Excuse me. They'll have history, philosophy, literature, maybe some guilty pleasure fiction. They'll have social critiques. They'll have some classics. They'll have military strategy. They'll have some books on biology. You don't see any of the books that the hustle bros are putting out there. And that's because those books really can expand your thinking, and they have their own list and how they're doing it. So here's how to look at book lists. So I go a few ways to create your own book list or find what to read versus just constantly looking for recommendations or just constantly depending on the 9 books to read before you turn 30, 40, 50 or whatever. So if you are new to a topic, again, you can look up the top 3 books on copywriting. You'll find Dan Kennedy's Ultimate Sales Letter. You might find Alex Hormozi's $100 Million Offers. And those books aren't bad starting points, right? But you want to go beyond from that. So to go past that, the easiest way is to do what I call swim upstream. Actually, well, I didn't call it that. I'm stealing that term from Alan Jacobs, but I'll swipe it. And I also call something rabbit holes. So swim upstream is you go with your curiosity, okay? So let's say, right, so we'll go Gary Halbert. So you get Gary Halbert. If you swim upstream from Gary Halbert, what you're looking for is you're looking for the person or the author who influenced that particular writer. Gary Halbert loves Joe Carbo. So, okay, you got Gary Halbert, so you go and find Joe Carbo's book, which is difficult to find, by the way, but you can find it out there. And it is a unique book, Joe Carbo's book. It has everything from copy to manifestation to mindset. I mean, if you read that one, you probably don't need the 9 books to read before you become an entrepreneur, because Carbo put it all in there. But you'll also, if you swim upstream from Gary Halbert, you'll find John MacDonald, one of his favorite fiction authors. And you can see, if you really love Gary Halbert, you can see the tricks he stole from MacDonald. And then eventually you're probably going to hit David Ogilvy or Claude Hopkins. So you can do that in copywriting. Okay, like you love John Carlton. Well, who did John Carlton love? Well, he's got Gary Halbert. Maybe he has Rosser Reeves. So you can start swimming upstream to start looking for these books, and that will give you your own list. Then, for instance, if you hit David Ogilvy will hit you over the head with Rudolph Flesch. And Rudolph Flesch has a number of great books on writing, and I'll cover those. And David Ogilvy, if you're really doing legwork, although he doesn't quite explicitly mention him, you can find Ernest Gowers, right? Or you can find Fowler's Second Usage. You're able to find the influences of these guys. Now, on a general list, outside of copywriting, swimming upstream is a fantastic way to get into great books or classics. For instance, my intellectual hero is Thomas Sowell. And I love his writing. I love his worldview. Every reading always blows my mind. One of his influences is Adam Smith. But I noticed, even though Thomas Sowell is a famous economist, and Adam Smith is kind of the father of free market economics, Sowell loves theory of moral sentiments. So, from influenced by Sowell, I read our theory of moral sentiments. And theory of moral sentiments is a little bit of a drier read. It's readable, but it takes a lot of time because he's throwing a lot of ideas at you. But the great thing with Swim Upstream on a regular author, so if you love a particular author and you really, doesn't matter if it's a fiction author or a nonfiction author, and you really love their writing, you love their ideas, as soon as they put out a new book, you can't wait to get it, or you want to read all of their books and you're familiar with their ideas. The great thing is you have an understanding of their ideas. When you swim upstream and say it is something a little bit more challenging, like theory of moral sentiments, because you're familiar with your favorite guy's ideas, you'll be able to grasp what's going on in that book. You might not get all of it, but you'll be able to put in your marginalia, your notes, like, this is what Sowell said. This is what he's talking about here. So you're able to unpack those ideas. Like, for instance, I know I heard an interview like Chuck Palahniuk, that's a fiction author. He loves, I think it was Thomas Hobbes. So if you love Palahniuk, Thomas Hobbes is an easy reading, but if you really love Palahniuk, you're able to go into that great work and you're able to at least extract some of the ideas and understand it. Versus going the other way of like, I need to read better books, so I'm going to pick up the, Immanuel Kant's, really difficult book to read. You won't understand it. It's very difficult, but if you have your authors and you really like them, you're able to go upstream and get them. And to return back to copywriting, when you start going upstream like this, you'll be able to see the influences on other people's writing. They may not be able to know it. Like you may be able to study Stephen Georgi's ads and you're able to see some sort of older influences, what's going on. That will take you above and beyond he's pressing on emotional fears. Oh, it's an open loop. Oh my God, he's open looping. Like that is good, but you want to see a little bit more than that. You want to be doing more than the guesswork. That's why it converts. You don't know why, but you want to be able to kind of, if you're able to see those influences, you'll be able to unpack that structure a lot more and take what you want, or, and swipe a lot better. You're able to see the structure that you can maybe work in the framework, or some ideas that you can possibly steal. So that's a cool thing with swimming upstream. Again, go with curiosity. And I know I just mentioned the great books. I'll mention that list here. Like the 9 books to become an entrepreneur, there are some sort of snooty books out there of, read these 100 books to develop taste. The books are good, but you're not going to, I'm going to read these 100 books and be real tasteful. Like, you just want to be looking at the books in your own. But there is a list out there called the great books. Mortimer Adler curated the list, but it's basically all of the ideas of Western civilization, kind of what influenced Western civilization, anything from ethics to literature to law. A great resource for it, I find, is Hillsdale College. They have a couple of free online courses, and also they have a list of the books here and there. It's a really good place as a starting point. I disagree with Adler. You don't need to start at the Iliad and then work your way all the way through. And you'll find that, you can kind of make this list a little bit of your own over time. You don't have to just stick to like the Hillsdale curriculum for it. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is these books are, if you just read 1 or 2 books on that list a year, it'll do wonders for they're a lot of fun to read. But seeing human nature, seeing the ideas of human nature, seeing how our society has structured, you'll learn so much from those books. You'll gain so much personally, you'll gain so much professionally. So I just feel remiss if I didn't mention that list. And again, Hillsdale College is really good with it. So to finish out lists, what I would do here, and I'm going to get into some books for copywriters to get into a little bit here. But as you start swimming upstream, or if you have copywriters you like, or personalities you like, to create your own list instead of being dependent on, read these 9 books before X or whatever. Just, on Amazon or create a list or whatever, find a thinker that you really like and see if that person mentions particular books. For instance, I'm going to mention Jack Carr here in a moment as a great book to read for copywriters, or a great author to read for copywriters. He mentions a ton of his favorite authors. He mentions a ton of his favorite shows. That's a great way to start creating a book list for yourself. I like the thinker Victor Davis Hanson. Every once in a while on his podcast, he mentions his favorite books or books that he is reading. I immediately write those down. And that sends you off into rabbit holes, right? Like Thomas Sowell mentioned Adam Smith, and Thomas Sowell mentions Edmund Burke. So you can kind of like, okay, these are all conservative thinkers. Let me read, I'm going to read these. And Thomas Sowell started out as a Marxist radical. So he has a wonderful knowledge too of books from the more liberal or socialist side. If you want to check those out, go ahead and check those out, right? It's all your curiosity. So if you have a thinker you like, that's a great resource. Especially obviously this happens with copywriters. It's a little bit difficult, right? Because if Alex Hormozi lists his favorite books on Twitter, it's probably his ghostwriter, and he's probably looking for engagement, and it's probably going to be the Almanac, $100 million offers, Atomic Habits. But what you can do is you can see if you can grab one of those books, right? Maybe he mentions Traffic Secrets by Russell Brunson. Then maybe you can start to try to look for something a little bit outside of the box. Maybe Russell Brunson mentions something outside of the standard success fare. And that's how you can start creating those kinds of lists. And in time for your writers, you should have some favorite writers that you love. And, especially ones in copy and outside of copy, and just be looking for the books that they like to read. Whether it's just, I read this book and I loved it. And then you're reading and you're like, well, why does he like it? I like his writing. Why does he like it? For instance, or another example is, I love Niall Ferguson. In particular, I love his writing style. Incredible writer. There's so much grace and power in his voice. So he loves Edward Gibbon. And I'm reading the Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire, which is this massive tome. But the writing is really good, right? Gibbon's very tongue-in-cheek. But it's because, I was glad I read Ferguson first because I'm able to grasp that sort of humor that Gibbon is using. So that is a great way to find lists. Find the thinkers and writers you really respect. Find the marketers you really and go from there. All right. And if marketer mentions the 9 books and it's all the same, just see if you can find something a little bit outside of that box of the 9 books. So, all right. Technical works for copywriters. All right. So I used to have a list that Nabil mentioned of books. I recently unpinned it, but I'm going to give some books that I think, I've given this some thought. If I had to go back and some books to go with that will help copywriters. So first of all, for you copywriters, you guys are professional writers. There's this idea of, the grammar is stupid and don't need grammar. That's right. You need to be a lexicographer or a grammar expert. But the more knowledge or understanding you have of grammar, it basically all it is, it's just your sword. That's all it is. You know how the sword works, you know how the sword is made, and you know how to wield it. Most people think, I'm just, it's fine to get the sword and start wielding it around, but if you start learning a couple little bit things of how to wield it a little bit better, or how to see what others or how they are wielding their sword, it just gives you a better eye for what you need to be seeing and writing. Also, good grammar helps you present things clearly. You can avoid the mistakes of creating confusion, or you can avoid the mistakes of using a whole ton of cliches. So, this idea of you don't need to know grammar is dumb. You need just a little bit will get you enough. You don't need to become a grammarian or anything like that. Now, there are a lot of copywriting books out there. A lot of copywriting books do stink. They can make your prose and your writing very trite. They can make your writing sound like everybody else. They're not all awful, as again, they're just starting points. Okay, there are some really good ones. The Ultimate Sales Letter by Dan Kennedy. Like, Dan Kennedy isn't a great copywriter, but that book will get you started because Dan Kennedy is a good copywriting coach and he understands structure. That's a really good one. But what's often overlooked is, coming back to my grammar point, are books on writing. This is really overlooked, especially today. Because the funny thing is John Carlton carried Strunk and Write, Elements of Style, in his back pocket when he was a copywriter. He showed me. I remember one time I was like so proud when he showed it to me. pulled out of his back. He brought it to an event because I was like, you didn't carry it around in your back pocket. Come on. He pulled it out, and there it was, all battered. Had clearly the thing was in the back pocket for years. Gary Halbert liked Ogilvy a lot, and Ogilvy loved Fowler. But if you notice, Gary Halbert would try to do new tricks with commas, right? He really was obsessed with grammar. So he read writing books. He read books on writing. A lot of the older writers, you can kind of see that. So books on writing do matter. Now I'll go first. Before I get into that, what I recommend is, if you are reading these books and in this manner I'm telling you or have been telling you before, what I recommend is, if you're just starting out in copy, or you feel like your writing is struggling a little bit, maybe every other book you read for just a little bit, not for the rest of your life, just a little bit, you read a grammar book or a book on writing, just every other book. As the more comfortable you get, then you can, maybe here or there, or maybe then it turns into once a year you read a book on grammar or good writing, just to kind of keep your tool set sharp. That will help you. On one end, it's going to do wonders for your writing. On the other end, while you are reading, when you are reading a little bit slowly, you're going to be able to see what the author is doing. That's going to give you that vision of thinking. And then, you're being able to see, like, oh, here how the author is presenting this particular idea, right? So you're engaging with that idea. So I will give, in the honor of my old list, some books. So we'll start with David Ogilvy loved Rudolph Flesch. Rudolph Flesch has a book on business communication. And that's the name of it, On Business Communications. Most people tend to read Art of Plain Talk, which is actually a rather difficult book to go through. It's pretty technical. I mean, it's well written, but when you start getting to the grading system of the Rudolph Flesch thing, it's a little bit technical. On Business Communications is a wonderful guide for tone in your voice. Keep in mind, it was written before emails were even thought of. So these are like people actually writing letters. I think it might have been like fax might have been new, but you can apply the lessons to emails, and it's a great way to help strip out cliches or hyperbole in your copywriting instead of just leaning on tactics. The next book that I really, really recommend is Better Business Writing by Brian Garner. I'm like, remove my thing here. There we go. I would get real cozy to Brian Garner. This is a great book to how to flesh out what you need to be doing, like how to come up with your ideas, how to present it clearly, and how to write it in a good manner, and also how to keep your grammar on the up and up. Now, a book that I regret not mentioning in that list is, I might have mentioned, I put that list, I can't believe that list is like 3 years old now. It's called The Book on Writing by Paula LaRoque. This might be one of the best books in how to really write good copy. Paula LaRoque was an editor for the Dallas Morning News and a writing coach. So she wrote for newspapers, and that book is really good on how to get a reader from top to bottom, and how to get them engaged, and what kind of writing style and what kind of writing tone gets them from top to bottom, because that's the only way that newspapers or presented the ideas. So yes, she's presenting journalism, but it's the old journalism of how, one, we got to get sales, we got to get people interested in these ideas. How can we do that? So she does a great way of doing it, especially a great way of making sure your sentences aren't what are called bushy sentences, where you understand what's going on, but the writer doesn't. And that's real important for copy. Oh, and you copywriters, I highly recommend you read Jack Carr. You will be like tonic to your copy. I liked Lee Child a lot when I was writing copy, but Lee Child writes in this kind of unique staccato manner, which is kind of like, I think it's sort of this imagery thing that he's doing, that Reacher is like marching, it's like the Roman legion showing up, and it's one man, it's Reacher, and he's coming. So, but he does a great job of taking anything technical and putting movement into it. He's a great guideline for what kind of words and what kind of sentence structure for copy, because it's so exciting. The other thing is he's a lot of fun to read. He's a ton of fun. So, and the importance of vocabulary. A lot of copywriters have this idea of, I don't want to learn big words because then I'll write big words. Like, no one's telling you if you learn a big word that you need to start writing big words. You don't need to say mentation and licentious and ultra crepidarian in your copy. But the more vocabulary you learn, like if you learn a word like ultra-crepidarian, when you learn that word, you then learn all of the simple Saxon words, which are all the small words of what makes that word. So those are basically bullshit and guru, person who has a false expertise of opinion, right? So learning words and increasing vocabulary really helps. And it isn't this idea of I learn big words so I can use big words. No, in copy, you don't use big words. You have to use very small words. In regular blog posts, if you want to use a big word, go ahead and knock yourself out. But in copy, you can't. So a fantastic way to do that is Charles Harrington Charles Harrington Elster, Verbal Advantage. It's tough. He quizzes you through it, but he shows you how he teaches you these words. You know, like you get a big word like parsimonious. He then shows you all the small words and all the cinnamon. Shows you, sprinkles that cinnamon on it, baby. So he shows the words that are synonyms to that particular word. And that's a great way to expand your vocabulary. And when you're expanding your vocabulary, when you're reading, it gives you more words at your disposal. It gives you more words at your deployment, which is really important with copy. Charles Harrington Elster has another one called Word Workout. I would do the other one first. It's because it's, there's actual quizzes you need to pass. Those are really, really good. If you want to read some of the older books, this hit me this morning, is Ward Farnsworth's Classical English Style. This is like a secret key to read old books, because you look at these old books and like, geez, these are really big words. And then he uses real easy words. Why is he doing that? Then you realize what they're doing. This is a great way to understand what's going on. And let's see if I got everything. Y'all, and another tip is, if you're reading, I keep a vocabulary journal. Not many of you will probably do this, but if you come across a word that you don't understand, or if you have any question, look it up and just write the word and write out the definition in your notebook, your journal, whatever. It's a great way to kind of, again, expand your vocabulary, because, again, you guys are copywriters, you're wordsmiths. You need to take particular sets of words and make that presenting something very clear, compelling, and original versus just generic and salesy. So that, I am at the end. One, thank you for listening. This is the first ever lecture I've done on something like this before. But the biggest thing is engage with the book. Have fun engaging with it versus just seeking the lessons. Don't just sit there and sit back and just try to find the lessons. Engage with it. Chew it over. Deliberate with it. Ask questions. Press back. Have heated disagreements with the author if you want. The more you engage with it, the more you're asking questions, that's going to elevate your thinking. Because to engage with an author like Thomas Sowell, or to really engage with what Gary Halbert is saying about copy, that's going to require you to start asking questions versus just seeking the lessons. So it's this very Socratic way of learning, and it puts you on your feet. You're not trying to just get the lessons from Gary Halbert. You're trying to leave on equal footing as Gary Halbert. And when you're reading fiction, if you're reading a little bit slowly, the most trippiest thing I found, to me, and it might be different for you, is when I started reading fiction a little slower, I felt I was in the world. It was really trippy. I'd be reading Raymond Chandler, and I felt like I was there. But then I was able to look at how is he doing this? How is he making me feel like I'm in a Los Angeles hillside on a 1938? How is he doing this to me? And that takes looking at those particular sentences and seeing the word choices, right? That's going to engage you in it versus just sitting there getting mindset secrets. Enjoy everything that I'm saying. Really, reading is enjoyment. Make it your own. What I say is not set in stone. It's going to evolve. Just make it your own and have fun with it, right? Reading is enjoyable. It's not some life hack or something. It's not going to suddenly optimize you into becoming this bot of success. Just enjoy it. There we go.
Fucking legend. Thank you, Jim. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Superb shit. Before we get to the Q&A, right? I know Jim said he's not going to sell anything, so I'm going to sell it for him. Speaking of going up and swimming upstream, if you join Jim's GoodWord membership for $9 a month, he basically, besides the super detailed newsletters he sends out that he can read from, he sends out from time to time his own lists. So for $9 a month, you can pretty much let him do the curation for you. and just read whatever the fuck he's reading. And that'll save you a lot of time. And as you've heard, probably he's not going to recommend bullshit. And I see a lot of the book is making. I see a lot of Thomas Sowell. I see a lot of philosophy. He kind of looks like Thomas Sowell, actually, if you squint.
Yeah, he's gonna really, really squint.
That kind of shit. And so $9 a month, man, and then he helps you out with copy as well. He's sort of like a competitor to Copy Skill. So, but learning from somebody who's way better at copy than me, so it's well worth money. So $9 a month. I dropped the link in the chat. It's jimclair.com/subscribe. Well worth the subscription. I think I've been subscribed 3 years now, and that's just my subscription is just to stay friends with Jim. So
I'm cheap, $9.
Don't have to buy
a Taco Bell.
Yeah, don't even have to buy him dinner.
Yeah.
And so recommend it if you want to go ahead and subscribe to that. That'll be worth your while. And for those of you who stuck around, there is going to be a recording that I'm going to leave up for about 24 to 48 hours. And so if you wanted to catch the recording, download it for yourself, that's fine. It's going to be available to you before I make it members only. For those of you who do want to be to sort of see what else we have available at Copy Skills, you can skills. It's $20 a month. I'll drop the link in the chat. And I'm not going to do a long sales pitch for it now because we've been on the call for such a long time. What I'll do is I'll probably schedule a demo call, and you probably get a notification about that. And those of you who are interested in joining that, you can join. But for now, I'll just drop the links in the chat. If you want to join, you can join. If not, that's fine too. I'll probably send you more notifications about when Copy Skills is open for enrollment. For now, you can just check out the links I'm dropping in the chat. And so let's move on to the Q&A. Those of you who have questions, you can either drop the questions in the chat, but ideally, I would love for you to come on camera and ask your on camera, just because that would be more fun. So there's a hand up, and you can raise your hand in the box. You can raise your hand, and then I'll add you as a co-host, and you can come on camera and ask your questions. Alternatively, you can just drop your question in the chat. So there was a question earlier. They wanted to know your lifts, Jim, your max lifts.
My max lifts.
Yeah.
Well, right now, squat's still at 585. I should have done 600, but I held back because I thought I was going to do it again sooner. But fortunately, right after that, I had a back injury where my back slipped, which was a pain in the butt. So I'm kind of still ramping it up slowly with some skiing. But so 585 is my squat single, 600 is my deadlift. But right before my back slipped, I was at 640 on a rack pull for a set of 5. And before that, and that round when I pulled 600, I was only doing that for triples, and it was smoking really fast. And then again, right before my back slipped, although it is back now, I did 520 for 5 sets of 5 on squats, and I'm back up there now, and it's moving faster. So that's a good thing. So that's where my upper body, my right shoulder had dislocated so many times, and out of the socket. My benches, I'm like 320 on bench, and my press is, I can't, it's anemic. So I'm just happy that my right shoulder no longer clicks. That's my goal. I used to wake up for years and it would click. So it doesn't fall out of socket anymore. You can kind of do some of the things now.
Nice. It's still pretty decent for an old man.
Yeah, it's not bad. That's not bad. I think ski season here, we're going to try to, I think we're going to go a 600 plus squat is what we're looking for. And then I have a physical therapy protocol that I did with how I'm training, and we're gonna deadlift back up. I mean, right now it's taken very easy because that slip was a little freaky, and hearing from the doctor that I can kind of slip at any time was a little bit. So I'm going to try to, but we think the way those we're gonna go up. We're gonna try a 600 plus deadlift here shortly enough. My back's feeling good, and the motion's feeling good. It's just that mental. I got to get, the don't slip, don't slip. I got through that sort of that thing there.
And even if you've never slipped it before, it always feels like it's about to slip when you're going heavy.
I got to go to the bathroom the other night, and it felt like my back cracked, just standard, and I was like, oh God, it's happening. So it's freaky.
Beautiful. All right, so are we gonna ask Brad's question, and then we'll go to Rogue on the audio, okay? So Brad is asking, do you read more than one book at a time, and how soon do you drop a book if you're not feeling it?
Oh, yeah, so thank you, Brad, because I did forget to mention that in the, I skimmed over that by mistake, the how fast I drop a book. So I will go first with everything I said. It doesn't mean you need to force yourself through a book. I give it, 25 to 50 pages, or if there's something like, I'm reading a fiction book, and then, 100 pages in, something really weird happens. And it's not weird. It's just like I read this great book about, or it was great until it was something like, it was about the writers of Frankenstein. It was a little bit weird, but I'm like, oh, this is kind of a neat story. And then all of a sudden it came out to this anti-Boris Johnson, anti-Donald Trump rants. And I'm like, I'm done. Like, what? They're talking about Victorian England or whatever. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump shows up. So 25 to 50 pages, and I'll toss it. If I really hate it, I will literally throw it into the trash. Literally. People are like, oh, you got to give it a time. No, I throw it in the trash, and just that's where it goes. Because I don't want anyone else to read how shitty it is. So it goes into a Colorado trash heap somewhere underneath, cat litter and dog throw up and whatever else. I am a person where I really struggle reading more than one book at a time. So I only go one book at a time. I'm somewhat convinced that people who can read more than one book at a time are aliens. But if I'm reading something that is rather intense or requires a lot of thought at night, I might read essays of an author I like, or short stories like a Raymond Chandler short story, something that doesn't really distract me.
So Muhammad asks, do you have any suggestions on reading STEM books?
STEM books.
STEM, yeah, STEM, right? Physics, chemistry, math.
Oh,
hard sciences.
I don't read those as very often. A little while ago, and it may work for you, is this guy named Scott Young. He has a blog and a book called Rapid Learner. He reads a lot of those books, and he uses something called the Richard Feynman technique, which is where he will kind of read in the way that I'm doing, but he tries to, if he note on something, he tries to, I think inside of a paragraph, be able to, if he can describe the concept that's written, something that's really difficult physics, he tries to describe it to something like what a 5-year-old can understand. I don't read a whole lot of those books, or I haven't lately. It's been a few years, but that seems to be a good idea. And that's what I would first suggest, is to go with like that, is how can you unpack the idea in a way that you're not just agreeing with the author, because that'll be easy to do. But if you can unpack it in that Richard Feynman way, I think that's probably a pretty good way to start engaging with those particular ideas. And if you want a good resource, Scott Young, he seems to like those books a lot. He's probably a better resource than I am on it.
Tim asks, for developing a more feminine voice or writing character, do you have any fiction or nonfiction book and author recommendations?
I'm trying to remember who I was in Yoga Burn. I mean, I was looking at things like People magazine, and in particular at that time, I was trying to find female authors who were probably likely writing articles towards their female audience. And People magazine is not necessarily a women's magazine, but I was trying to find those articles like that. And I would look towards fiction. It doesn't mean you need to go through like the silly romantic novels, but there are some good female authors out there who write to a more female base, but the stories are really good. So mass fiction. J.K. Rowling's really good. Yeah, she's writing more unisex. I think a great reference would be so J.K. Rowling writes under a pseudonym named Robert Galbraith in the Cormoran Strike series, which is fantastic. I think it blows the doors off of Harry Potter. Totally different. It's about a detective. It lives in downtown London. It's a great character. how she writes Robin. It's kind of a character series. How she writes Robin, and especially in more intimate moments of, either Robin is struggling to express her feelings about Corman Strike or other things. That's probably a really good look, because that's when J.K. Rowling takes off kind of the writing as a man cap, and you can really start seeing the softness of the language, but also not just the softness, also the strength of Robin's sort of character. That would probably be a good place to start.
All right, so I'll just go to Eric's question. Is there a big disadvantage for a foreigner like me, so he's Swedish, to get into copywriting and compete on the international market?
No, that's a short answer. No, there isn't. The only barrier might be kind of the vernacular and the, more, if you're competing more in an American market, it would be obviously Swedish tastes and Swedish market desires are going to be more cultural. So the first vernacular, if you're worried about the vernacular, again, read Jack Carr. You get a more American guy, and I would look into Jack Carr's. He mentions a ton of the people he likes and even the TV shows that he likes. That would be a great way to kind of pick up that sort of vernacular. The other thing is that I mentioned is about, reading books out of success books. So if you're reading books that help you think conceptually, you'll be able to, or think conceptually on a market, you'll be able to understand it a bit better. But you might want to, probably wouldn't hurt to maybe read a social critique, or it could be from Thomas Sowell. I mean, Ross Douthat has a great one out there about decadence. Just kind of gives you an idea of American thinking a little bit, because it's, if you're going on Twitter, you would think the Americans hate each other. Republicans and Democrats completely hate each other, and the Republicans hate each other, and the Democrats, so you would think it's this weird mix. That really isn't the case. So I would kind of look at to see if maybe you can find a book that discusses, just a couple social issues. It doesn't need to be anything intense. That will help you kind of get an idea of, an American market. And also, if you're looking at American advertising and you're studying it, you'll get a decent idea of what the Americans like. And I would start there.
Let's go to you, then we'll go to Hamza, and then I'll go to Michael.
There we go. Just stopped troubleshooting, guys. Sorry about that. Right. So thank you for having me, Nabil. And as always, brother Jim, loving it. I don't know if my camera is acting up. Don't worry too much about it. The one question that I do have is, you made it between practical books, workbooks, and stuff like that, as far as I understood it, right? Mm-hmm. And so the question that I have is that workbooks, they are, for the most part, beneficial, right? We can use them, work. But the problem is, how does that mesh with this whole idea of trying to avoid the lesson hunting paradigm, right? And at the same time, not feel like every single page is trying to prescribe so many solutions, right? That if you're not extracting all these lessons, in a sense, right, you're not getting anything good out of that book, right? Best example here, if I may add a little bit of context for that question, a lot of people know I'm into sales, right? And so there's a bunch of books I read: Psychology of Selling, Ian Arena of Closing, Sandler's, and most of these books would probably fit the workbook paradigm pretty well, right? And so when you go through these books, there's this sense that if you're not extracting everything from each page, right, you're not going to sell better or something like it. So how would you mesh this whole idea of having this conversation with the book, etc., the entire go through, right, with something like a workbook that by definition has way too much information that they want you to understand? It makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And the simple answer would be to treat it more like a practical book, or to treat it like a regular book. So on the first level, because I somewhat disagree. Well, I guess I don't disagree. It depends on the sales book, because some sales books are like pure anecdotal stories, right? The scenarios are perfect, and then you kind of get what happened. You don't hear the failures or stories, or even you do hear the failure stories. Like Tom Hopkins has a book on his failures or something, but they're all kind of like chintzy. They're not bad, right? And I mean, I like Jim Camp's book, Start With No, but when you read the book, it's all anecdotes, right? So I would treat it like that, like a practical book. I still would read it in the same way. So I'll unpack this. So when on a workbook, or someone say something. Okay. So like Atomic Habits, right? It gives you, the marginal habits, how to do it. So it gives you things to kind of prune the hedges of what you're doing. Or the vocabulary books that I mentioned, right? It's, there isn't really, there's kind of a thesis, kind of not, but you're going through, level 1, level 2, all the way up to level 10, and you're taking quizzes and tests, and you're getting some, so you're not really getting, it's giving you a ton of information, but you're engaging with a book, right? There's actual, for you to go on in that book, you need to pass the tests, and he's pretty tough. You need to get an 8 out of, I think, at least an 80%. In some of those chapters, it's very difficult to do that, right? So there's an actual like testing thing that they're doing. I still like to look at when I'm looking at, so that book is more granular as far as workbooks. So a book like that, I still like to look at is how are they presenting these ideas? I still look at what is being said in the whole. How is he presenting to learn vocabulary? How is he presenting to understand what he's saying? Now with sales books, I'm doing the exact same thing. Okay, this is all anecdotes. That's where I start asking questions. Okay, it's not that the method is bad or anything like that. I'm looking like, okay, what kind of method is he really trying to say here amongst these anecdotes? And then that's where you kind of realize you can start weeding out what isn't really, maybe what's very repetitive from what is pretty good. Like you can take Jim Camp's things, okay, it's a lot of anecdotes, the writing's a little trite, but this idea of framing at the start, that's what he's really trying to say here. So I would look at it like that way. How are these ideas being presented versus just sitting back there, let me just get these lessons. Well, that does matter. You still want to get on top of the idea or this thing of, I want to engage it on this level. So I'm still looking at it, what is this idea really doing? And I still like to ask questions. And this will take a lot of those sort of sales books down a big peg. Not all of them. When you're saying as opposed to what, right? So if you go to Jim Collins' Good to Great and you say as opposed to what, like when he says, well, they decided to grow their revenue. Well, as opposed to what? Not grow the revenue? Well, of course he wants to grow the revenue. Okay, so it's like, but if he isn't able to explain that afterwards, and it's kind of like, all right, he's not really saying anything. But, something like Jim Camp or a sales book like that, or even Tom Hopkins, is they have at least in the anecdotes or something that you can say like, oh, so what you're saying is, for like Tom Hopkins, so what you're saying is that you want to prep your sales environment when someone's coming over to look at this particular house, you want to prep it in a way that makes them feel welcome. So I need to be doing some sort of groundwork. So that's kind of what engagement. So you're still doing the same thing. As I mentioned before, but you're not just sitting back and taking the lessons. You're trying to almost, it's like you're workshopping with them to write the lessons yourself a little bit, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
That does make sense, brother. Appreciate you.
Awesome, thank you.
Fucking Rogue looks like AI, dude. Your camera.
I know. We don't know if it's him.
You look like Synthesia. You guys know Synthesia, where it's the AI avatar that you can.
Yes, sir. Yes, we are.
You look like a fucking Synthesia, but Hamza, go ahead, bro.
Hey guys, thank you both for hosting this amazing seminar. I really gained a lot out of it. I had a straightforward question, really. Might require some thinking. I don't know, but what was the most groundbreaking book you read?
Cool. I mean, there's a few. I'll go with recently. I'll go recent nonfiction, and then I'll try to answer with fiction. But nonfiction, I could say Thomas Sowell, but I didn't find him if I didn't read Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution of France caught me at a time, when after Stoicism, I had just sort of launched this, what I was doing, and I was really wondering on my particular worldview. And then from that book, how he was saying things, even he has a philosophical book out there on he defines a kind of what is a woman to look for, what makes a beautiful woman. And he takes it beyond looks and everything. That just opened up a whole door to me. That led to Thomas Sowell. And then Thomas Sowell led to so many other factors for me. You know, even how, like, I have not the shelf behind me, but the shelf in my main room, I have a great bookshelf, and it leans a little bit more towards conservative, you know. But yeah, I mean, there's like the Karl Marx is on there and everything, but it leans more conservative, but it's because of soul and like how I was looking there. So, I mean, Burke was a big proponent that led me to Tom Sowell, and that threw open the doors. I'm trying to think back in copywriting. I mean, yeah, geez, when I first discovered Gary Halbert, I was like, oh my God. Because I remember my dad was kind of a bit of a prepper. So I remember reading these ads of how to defeat, you know, as a kid at the kitchen table, like how to defeat any man with one punch. I'm like, oh my God, Dad, you got to get this. He's like, all right. But then all of a sudden I see that later, and that was like, oh my God. I can't believe I'm finding the guy behind these ads or the world behind these ads when I was a little kid reading these crazy defeat any man ads. So that was groundbreaking in a sense. I know I have made my criticisms of Gary Halbert, but people mistake that for me not liking him. I have an enormous amount of respect for Gary Halbert. And I see people lying about his past, which really upsets me. I mean, I named one of my pets after Gary Halbert. So, but that was groundbreaking, and so we'll go with there. Oh, and the fiction. Recently, I just read The Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun. I thought that was just so beautiful. How he displays values, traditions. It was just incredible. It really made me able to see it in the world, and I thought it was just so beautifully written.
Awesome. I'm going to do some quick fire questions.
All right.
I'll get to Michael's question after, because that might be a slightly longer answer. Is there any niche of book that you refuse to read? Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know if I refuse to read, but I am real tired of marketing books, business success books, copywriting books. That's not that I wouldn't read them again. Like for resources, like Tyler Cowen, he's a great resource for books. He rarely mentions, like success books. But he wrote a book called Leading, which I think was by the Manchester United coach or general manager. And I haven't, but I don't know I just don't know if I'm ever going to read it. But that would be it. But that's just kind of a vibe. I don't know if there's anything I would necessarily refuse. I mean, there's a lot of like anything written by Yuval Noah Harari now. I'm not going to read that. I've read *Sapiens*, but anything else he's writing now, it's so repetitive, same stuff. So I won't read any of that. There's some fiction where I walk into the bookstore and it's the same thing. It was a girl who grew up tucked in the Bible Belt of America and she felt depressed. Like, I'm not reading this stuff, that's about it. So it's not necessarily anything I refuse, but if it doesn't capture me, I'm not going to do it. Or if I have a known idea that after reading Harari and *Sapiens*, I know what's coming down the pike, so I'm just not going to read them. And then coming back to the marketing stuff, it just doesn't appeal me or interest me anymore. I know I feel bad. Some people recommend like, oh, have you read Norman Vincent Peale yet? And I have, but I'm not going to read him more again. So that's probably my, it's not refusing it. It doesn't speak to me.
Yuval Noah Harari is like a physiognomy check to decide whether or not you're going to read his books.
Yeah.
All right. So Michael asks, I don't know if you're keeping up with the fucking AI conversation around copy, but he asks, what will happen for the future of copywriting in terms of AI? I know the top people will sustain, but what are the rest of us going to do, basically?
Well, I thought, and I put this up on Twitter, I thought Stefan Georgi really had a good way of putting it, because he found ways to put prompts into the system. And it produced out okay copy. It was the writing was a little bit sophomoric and puerile, but at a baseline, it wasn't bad. The biggest thing, this is why I would say become a good reader, because that's where you can steal language, because AI is going to do a really good job as it grows and gets better with algorithms of finding formulaic copy, because a lot of copywriters tend to write in this formula. Now, structure is important. You can steal structure all the time. You can steal open loop to problem. So there's plenty of structures to use, but it's that language inside of it that matters. And if you're able to think creatively and you're able to phrase creatively, one, good readers will be able to take an AI copy. If it's something, I think there's going to be probably some benefit if a business owner can use AI to write something really quickly that matters, but a copywriter will be able to take the language and make it either less sophomoric or vulgarized or cliched and make it a little bit fresher, or good copywriters who can think conceptually, who can understand observations, who can have a large vocabulary. And that doesn't mean, again, big words, but who have a large set of words and language at their disposal. They're going to be able to survive. So I would say read better, read good creative books, read a lot of different types of books, and that will help start getting your thinking outside of either you can use the formulas to your advantage, or you can also step outside of it and you'll be able to create and write something that the formulas won't be able to come up with.
And what you're finding is the people who get the best output from the AI generative outputs are basically the specialists. So the coders are the ones who are able to ask ChatGPT the right questions to get the output that they want, and it's the same with the copywriters, and it's the same with the graphic designers, because they know the lingo.
Yeah.
And so Stefan Georgi is able to produce much better copy than you or I. Not Jim, because Jim is pretty good, but like regular copywriters like me. So like he knows exactly what to ask the OpenAI prompt to get the right kind of output. Right. And I posted a screenshot on my Twitter yesterday of Stefan basically querying OpenAI, and he basically he gets some output, and then it's basically some sort of emotional language related to why this coach's business is failing. And then his next output is, so he gets 10 bullet points, right? And his next output is, his next query is, rewrite the above to make it 3 times more hurtful. Now, if you're not somebody who understands copywriting, you're not going to know to query OpenAI that. And so when he presses submit, now the copy comes back and it sounds like something that a direct response copywriter wrote, because it's hurtful as fuck. It's like,
right. And that takes that kind of observational ability to understand that. And then just like you said, to be able to have the principles to know how to do that versus like, just write me a sales letter selling X. So, Stefan would know that the spectrum of emotional pain in that particular market. Does it need to be pressed on way more? Does it need to be dialed back, and that needs to be pressed way more? And that comes from good critical thinking and being able to see your market on a level that's not just problem solution. So that's why I argue reading definitely helps you. That was a great thread, though. But that was fantastic.
And we're coming up on 2 hours now, so we're just going to ask one more question. Right. And so Al asks, when starting your copywriting journey, do you suggest going niche or not? And if yes, how would you pick the niche? And also he has a second part to the question. He asks, how would you test your copy if you don't have previous experience or clients? That question you could probably answer better than I could, Nabil, but I'll give it my old college try. I'll see if I can dust off the sleeves here. My thing is, if you can get hired, that's a thing, versus if you're just worried about like, I want to get into a niche. If you have that luxury, right, and you have a financial net that you can try to pick a niche if you want, great. But and you don't want to get into a niche. If you're getting into a niche where it's like astrophysics engines for Boeing, that might be a little bit of a challenge. But first of all, if you can just get hired and start writing copy, that's the biggest thing. The best way to become a good copywriter is you got to start writing copy. And you got to get into something and start writing copy. Good copywriters are able to then understand and can transfer over, and then also know like, well, maybe that's not a good niche for me because I don't know anything about it, and or I hate that particular thing. So that's how I'd answer. If you can get hired, then go for it. But if you have some financial background or financial safety net to hold off a little bit, and you maybe say you understand or you're passionate about something. Passionate is such a shallow word, but if you have a familiar knowledge with, I don't know, survival or prep or SaaS or something, and you're able to try to get into a start there, you probably will do okay because you have some sort of knowledge about it. But you have to go off that. You can't come in like, oh, I know all about this. You have to come in that you're becoming as a copywriter now. So what your knowledge is probably not going to
address to the market. So but if you know it, you're going to be able to at least have an understanding of what's going on. So, I mean, that's kind of where Bill would know probably better than I would now. It's been a while since I've done that. 'Cause, I mean, I fell into copy very by fortunate chance. You know, 'cause I didn't get in very traditional. I literally kind of stumbled in. I stumbled into a basement. It's pretty much how it happened for me.
That was a pretty good answer, though. For being out of the game for so long, it's a pretty good answer.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I would just get hired, start writing. Right?
yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Okay.
In my case, so as far as picking a niche goes, you're not going to know what niche you want to be in unless you've written for a few. So in the beginning, all you're trying to do is just get any kind of client. You might go broad, say you want to do something in e-commerce, and you'll sort of go that way. Or you might go broad, thinking that you want to write for course creators. If you do decide to pick a niche, though, I would go with something that not a lot of people are writing in, and it's easier to make money. So I would go something like B2B software, that kind of thing. But in general, when you have zero experience, it's very difficult to niche down. Your only basically concern is really trying to get any kind of client whatsoever. I would recommend, if you have zero experience and you're just starting out, my recommendation is don't start off as a freelance copywriter. Try to get a job in-house, either at an agency or at a business writing their copy. When you're applying for these jobs, you have to be very clear that you are a beginner, and just sort of win them over with your sincerity and your work ethic. Just tell them, I'm just starting out. I'm looking to work as hard as possible. I'm going to learn fast, and I'm going to be very, very easy to work with. And that's sort of your in. And then once you start to get some wins under your belt, then you can sort of decide what you want to do. Your number one thing is, because you don't have your copy tested, you don't know whether you're competent or not. It's one thing to get feedback from other copywriters or just feedback in general, but until your copy is out in front of the market and you get the numbers back, you have no idea whether your copy is converting or not. So the number one thing that you need to do is to get the sort of data back on whether or not your copy is performing. And to do that, you need to sort of get any kind of client that you can get. So that's number one. Well, I think I answered both of your questions there. So how to pick a niche and how to test your copy.